On this tutorial, we're going to discuss, once you've finished building an advisor project, how do you set it up so it reloads data for a user community? And there's two ways that can happen: on demand or on a script that loads data either on an event trigger or on some timer. Usually, in our cases, it would be daily. And then that can be used by a larger group of people. So to start, the information we're going to talk about here is also available in our implementation guide. And that guide ships with the software on the CD, the install image. But it's also available in the program file where the software is installed. And if you go there, here I'm looking at, for the Analyst X, there's a set of files. One of them is this implementation guide, which is a PDF, and it takes you through a whole lot of the issues about installing, running hardware, RAM, platforms, and I'm going to get down to page 5 here. And page 5 talks about the scheduled data updates that we're going to go through right now. And then it gets into security and so forth, because obviously in production you might want to set a web-based version up with HTTPS and log on for the projects that people are running. Let's drop out of that. So that's where the reference document for this is. The first thing we need to just discuss is two file formats that we use. There's another tutorial on this under designing pages at the end of saving projects, goes a little more detail on this. But here's a project. I finished my work. I go to the File menu, Save Project As. There's two file formats. There's one called an ADV, a second called an ADVM. The ADV file format is the XML description of the project with all the metadata. So it's got the source loads, all the calculations, copies, all the things that go on behind the scenes, the page structure, the chart layouts, all of that is in the file saved. It has no data. So when you open it, it goes to the data sources and pulls the data in and rebuilds the project. The second form of a project, an ADVM, saves that same XML shell of the project, but it saves it with an encrypted and embedded set of all the data from when it was last loaded. They're two different file formats. One can be saved back as the other. So if I'm running an ADVM with a snapshot of data and I want to reload, I can save the file as an ADV. That'll reload the data. If I'm running an ADV and want to snapshot my work, I can save it as an ADVM, and it'll be snapshotted with the data that I had loaded at that time. So two different file formats. The reason you use an ADV is you're exploring, you're mucking around, the data's changing, and you want to reload on the fly, or you have small data sets. The reason you'd want to use an ADVM is with larger data sets, so there's two issues. One is load time, and the second is RAM footprint. So an ADVM is going to go, if you have 60 tables and maybe 30 are from an Oracle database, 15 are from a SQL Server database, you've got some Excel spreadsheets, it's going to go load all of those so the database write time is relevant, and at the middle of the day that can slow down with heavy usage in the database. The network load time is important because it's going to stream over the network. So if you're loading a large project with maybe 30 million rows, 30 fields from 60 tables, that might take 15, 20 minutes in the middle of the day. The ADVM, that's loading from an ADV. The ADVM is loading from an encrypted binary format in our file format. That same file will typically take 10 to 30 seconds to load if you're running an ADVM. And again, the data is heavily compressed. It's in a format that matches how we load in RAM. All the calculations are pre-done, so it's set to go and run. So the first advantage of an ADVM on a large project is faster load times. The second is much smaller RAM footprint, often half. So with a large data set, 60 million rows, couple hundred fields, 50 tables, that could take 5-ish gigs of RAM as an ADVM. It was going to take more like 8-ish gigs of RAM as an ADV. So to summarize, in production, you normally want to have the data snapshotted, preloaded, and then loaded from the users, then click on the ADVM, and that's what loads. So now we're going to look at these two setups. So I'm going to open PowerPoint here, just take you through a few pages. First, on demand, and second, this scheduled updates, and we'll show you how to do it. So in on demand, again, anybody running an ADV can reload data one of two ways: by opening the project, loads all the data, or on the task view, and also from one of the pull-down menus, there's a control called refresh data that will also reload all the data, which is useful. If you're doing ad hoc analysis and discovery, you've done some work, you've made some changes, you want to see what the changes look like, you just click refresh data and it will reload. And in both cases, this contains all the source definitions. So what this looks like is if you're running on a client, this could be our Analyst, Analyst X, or Desktop Navigator, you have an ADV project, you open it or refresh it, it sends query out to the database sources, and this could be a bunch. It could be an Oracle database, SQL Server, some text files, and so forth. The data streams back down, loads into RAM on the client, and the project opens up. Advisor Server runs the same way. When somebody accesses it, be one of a number of browsers or an iPad, it loads the project, it kicks off, it sends a query to the database sources, streams them all down, loads into RAM on the server, and then it's shipping images. And so it's a thin footprint on the client and iPad, and the data is loaded in here. The ADVM works differently. So generally, in the scheduled daily refresh, there's an ADV project sitting on a file server somewhere. At some point, a script kicks off that executes something called an ADV to ADVM utility. That causes this ADV project to query the database structures, grab the SQL Server, Oracle tables, text files, whatever is needed, loads it, opens the project, then converts the ADV to an ADVM project and puts it somewhere. So after that process is run, say this kicked off at 3 in the morning, there's going to be this ADVM file which is going to have a much shorter load time, it's going to take a lot less RAM footprint, and then users can come in on their clients or over the web or iPad to Advisor Server. It'll open this file and give them the experience we've been talking about. So this is typically, in production, what it looks like. And this will scale up and out to a bunch of users. It takes the load off the database, and has the speed and memory footprint advantages. So the next couple of pages are going to take a look at, if you wanted to set this up, how would you do it? So here's the process. And again, this is in detail in that implementation guide I mentioned earlier. You save the ADV master project into a designated spot on the Windows file server. You saw that in the prior schematic. This file server needs one copy of Advisor Analyst installed on it. This does not count as one of the purchase seats. Key point there. This ADV project contains the data source definitions and logon permissions to access the various tables. When opened, it will access and load each of the tables in sequence. Then use Windows Scheduler to start a script at, say, 3 a.m. to run the ADV to ADVM utility. This comes on the install image with the software, so it's back in the program files directory, and if you access it, it will open and run. It opens the ADV file and then converts it to an ADVM file and stores it at a specified location on the file server. Note, there's an option here to either include or not include the database logon credentials in this derivative ADVM file. The reason you might not want to do that is you have a bunch of end users and you do not want them to be able to save the file back as an ADV or have any chance of getting the logon credentials to the database. The reason you might want to do that is you have passed the logon credentials to ADVM is you have some power users who you actually do want to be able to go access new tables from the database and so forth. So there's an option here on what happens with the passcodes, but they do need to be in this master ADV project because it's got to go access the databases and open and load the tables. Typical script to create this file with the date and file name is this. Again, this is in the implementation guide. If you want to get this from here, I'd put this video on pause, grab this, and you've got it. But this script would create a file named data analysis, that's what the file name is, with the data in it, ADVM, and put it on a file server. Then end users open this file with their client Analyst, Analyst X, or desktop. The file opens and runs on the PC, or via browser, it opens run on Advisor Server. So this is the process in the exact form of script. Obviously, there can be modifications to it. And the modifications might be you don't want the file with the date every day. You want a generic, current project. Just says, data analysis current. People open it, it's today. And you might want to then also periodically save snapshots. So you might expand this script so that at the end of every quarter, you put this data analysis project with the end of the quarter date in some repository somewhere where you now have the history of the data, which is useful if you're doing promotional analysis in August of 2013. you want to look back and see what was going on in the the September quarter from the year earlier, you'd have that data available, and it's basically a snapshot of the entire database mart as you had loaded at that time. So this script can obviously be expanded and do a number of things with naming and one file that's updating daily and another file that's being date stamped and stored somewhere else. A couple of helpful tips if you're going to do this. This is sort of school of hard knocks, so we've seen this where people don't think this through. You obviously want to select a Windows machine or a virtual machine. Doesn't have to be Windows Server to run the nightly update process that is up overnight, like not a laptop that could be closed down and shut. And it has to access the database and or all the data sources. So if you're loading from Oracle tables, this thing needs network path to Oracle with the logon credentials. If you're also loading Excel files, it needs network path to wherever these Excel files are, and they should be there, etc. If you're deploying your project with Advisor Server AE, this could be the same machine that runs Server AE. So this just needs to be a Windows file server, but it needs to be on and it needs to have network access. Pick a network location to store the nightly update results where users with desktop software can get to them. Pick a location for the master file that is only accessible to the update machine and kind of people authorized to make project changes that will affect all of the users. So yeah, we've seen obviously users have to get at it, and the master file that reloads, you generally want some change control on it, and you want to limit who can get at it because it's really confusing. If somebody wants to update the project and they just do, and the next morning everybody gets a project update, that's really hard for end users to deal with. So we strongly recommend that master file, that's the one that gets kicked off in that script, is in some place that only one or two or some very limited number of people can access, and there's change control around what happens to it. The Windows scheduled tasks should be configured to use an account that has write permissions to the results directory in there, and if any project uses SQL Server data sources integrated to secure the account that the scheduled task runs, as must have read access to the SQL Server data. The task should be set to run whether users logged on or not, because the thing needs to actually run. And if using Server AE and data export is desired, the following process should be followed for making updates to the master ADV file, because you want that to remain on. And if you, I'm not going to read through this, but if you want to get this, I advise pausing the video here and just capturing this page. And again, this is in the implementation guide we mentioned earlier. So that covers it. Thanks for your attention.